Hey, and welcome to another episode of Plug and Play EV. In this one, we will be taking a look at the Volkswagen ID.4 against the Tesla Model Y, specifically for road tripping. Now, I rented both of these cars in the past few months for winter road trips, although as you'll see the conditions are pretty different in both of these, so it's not a fair direct test, but it's something of an overview of how these cars handle on kind of semi-longer trips, both around 500-600 miles in total round trip, Boston down to the tri-state area, mid-New Jersey, around Philadelphia, that kind of thing. Again, both different trips, but long enough to get a good feel for the car at highway conditions, look at the driver assist technology, look at the charging experience, real world range versus the kind of estimated range and how both cars do that. So there's a lot of interesting kind of comparisons. So the first and probably most important caveat is that the ID.4 road trip was done in early January when the temperature was about as cold as it's going to get around Boston, at least, that kind of single digits, maybe up into the teens during the high point of the day, but essentially midwinter, super cold, worst conditions for a battery electric vehicle other than driving in snow and ice. It was dry, was clear, but it was down in those very low temperatures that the batteries just don't like. Compared to the Tesla Model Y, which we did in early March, so still in winter technically, but we had 60-degree temperatures on the way down, only in the 40s on the way back, but you still get to see that that's much more favorable to the Tesla in that scenario. So we really did have the ID.4 on about as bad as we could have got, other than ice and snow. But still, you know, they hold up. The comparison is there over the kind of 500 to 600 miles that we did in both vehicles, similar areas, similar first place to stop for charging, and some interesting takeaways with, you know, Tesla having a certain range that you expect and the greater efficiency actually not making that much difference to the road trip. But bear in mind, as we compare here, we're talking about freezing, frigid conditions for the ID.4 and much more favorable conditions for the Model Y, so that's obviously got to factor in. So in terms of distance and location, the first trip was down to central New Jersey in the Volkswagen ID.4, and then the second trip in March was down to Bethlehem, Pennsylvania in the Tesla Model Y. So similar routes until you hit the kind of tri-state area. The main bit that we'll be looking at that's directly comparable for range at least is the first bit. So you leave Boston, you hit the I-95, I-90 kind of corridor for the first 45 minutes or so. You segue off on to I-84 into Connecticut, get down to around Hartford area, and a couple of options then, but you can either continue on I-84 into a little bit of New York and then down if you want to avoid the city, or just go down south, meet 95 and kind of hit New York City in its upper boroughs. You know, the main bit that I want to compare for this is how much you can do on that first leg, because if you're thinking about what we can do in the Bolt, we have done stints in summer all the way down to Newburgh, New York, so we can kind of get a couple of 100 miles in. Obviously in the winter you're talking about a slightly different scenario, and the Bolt would have earlier stops in any case. So ID.4, I didn't do this particularly well. I wanted to stop in Manchester, Connecticut, because we know the area and I needed some supplies. So, you know, this was the outward journey. You'll see it was 10 to 20 degrees Fahrenheit on the temperature here, so well below freezing. I did decide to stop in, it's just before Hartford, Connecticut. So this is about 100 miles into the journey. Still had a good 38% of the pack left. So realistically, we were doing somewhere between 2.2 and 2.3 miles per kilowatt hour at that point. High speeds, cold battery, generally not very good. I also started at a slightly lower percentage than in the Model Y, at about 91% in the ID.4. So with stopping that early, obviously I was not making the best of the lower state of charge in the ID.4 and getting faster speeds, and we started up at around I think it was 60 to 70 kilowatts, which is not great for that car. Its max should be 125 kilowatts, with a rumored software update bringing it up to 135 kilowatts in the near future, which will be much more competitive with the likes of the Ford Mustang Mach-E. So you can see early stop, not maximizing the time, and we probably could have gone down a little bit further past Hartford. But again, in some ways this reflects where Tesla has a slight advantage. Wherever you wanted to stop pretty much in Connecticut, there was an option around those service plazas. So a little more tipping in the balance of the supercharger and Tesla's planning to that. In other circumstances, we could have found a place to charge the ID.4. We probably could have gone a little bit further past Hartford and maybe got 160, 170 miles under our belts, which is a solid 2.5 hours of driving, and about what we would normally do with kids in the car at least. Obviously, there's different ways those calculate. Tesla is always a lot more generous with its calculations, and the way the car measures it is different to a lot of non-Tesla EVs. It starts out, anytime you start pretty much with that 330, the theoretical maximum, and then just goes down and adjusts your trip based on the way you're driving and a bunch of other things that the algorithm factors in. But even that, you would expect, maybe you take off some 10-20% of that, you're still in the high 200s. And it still wanted to stop in Connecticut. You're thinking for the particular journey that we did, Bethlehem in Pennsylvania is around 300 miles away. You're not expecting to get all the way there without a charging stop, even though the EPA range is 330. On the Model Y, using any kind of heating, any kind of high speeds, any kind of elevation is going to eat into that range. So a charging stop was expected, but it was where the charging stop was kind of recommended that was a little bit kind of off whack, really. You may be thinking you can get down to that New York, New Jersey area and get a good solid 3 hours of driving in. That would put you at kind of conservative speeds at around 210, 220 miles into the journey, 3 hours of driving. We weren't really getting much advantage if you compare the situation. Say the ID.4 had more favorable conditions and we could get a bit further past Hartford. You may get into the western Connecticut and even eastern New York, New Jersey kind of charging stops, which would then make it very comparable with what you could do in the Tesla if you pushed on. On paper, we'll say this goes way further. You can get 70, 80 more miles out of it. Realistically, it doesn't make that much difference on your road trips. It's road trips where this stuff really gets, into the rubber meets the road, and that's where you expect a Tesla to excel. And the Model Y did in many ways. The routing, obviously navigation is significantly better. It'll tell you exactly what you need to do, where you need to stop, whether you're on plan or off plan, if you need to adjust your route, all of that kind of stuff. So a big tick in its pros column for that. But, in terms of actual distance you can drive and what it wants you to do with all this better route planning, not actually that much further in terms of making the trip down into Connecticut. You're still stopping, and, that's where then Tesla comes into its own again because of the charging reliability and speed. So we touched on routing. Obviously, you have the Tesla navigation with the Model Y, similar to the Model 3, and that's getting updates all the time via over-the-air. And as long as you like the system and the way it works, then it's really, that's what you want, is an option for the car to just tell you exactly what to do and how to do it, where to stop, how long to charge, what percentage state of charge you'll arrive with, and then, you know, continue on that cycle until you reach your destination. Not so in the ID.4. Now, one of the advantages of it, if you like, the system, is Android Auto and Apple CarPlay availability. Obviously, that's down to personal preference. We like it, and I was glad to have that, and the functionality was seamless in the ID.4. It comes with wireless Android Auto. Worked perfectly every time, absolutely no complaints about that. And obviously, coming from a Bolt, we know the local charging stations, we know these routes fairly well, so the navigation and it telling us where to stop and for how long isn't quite as important. So I think Android Auto is a plus in the ID.4's column, but at the same time, the baked-in software, if you like to use the you know, kind of native navigation, sucks. It's not good. The software on the ID.4 is not you know, is come in for a lot of criticism, rightly so, I think. And now that they're updating, you have version 3 and version 3.1 on the horizon here as we leave March 2022. So there's scope for that to improve and do much better. The few times I tried the navigation in the ID.4, it just was, aside from the clunky controls and the haptic feedback not being particularly good, it just didn't work very well. It felt very dated. 10 years old, from a company that should be putting much better software into its EVs. So Tesla clearly wins out on that. Navigation, although I have a few nitpicky points with the size of the navigation things on the Tesla and kind of how it presents that information, it still, as an EV route planner, does a far better job. Now, the Tesla trip was longer and in more pleasant weather, so it has a little bit more data to use, and we have some more different driving conditions because we hit some of the more rural roads, and it's clearly more fun. It's, you know, performance is Tesla's party trick, much quicker acceleration. It's an all-wheel drive versus a rear-wheel drive in the ID.4, so not a fair comparison on that point. More about road tripping and the comfort of the car. In terms of comfort, you'd possibly put the ID.4 ahead. They're both very capable, comfortable road trippers. And if you're focusing purely on cabin comfort, Tesla has a far better infotainment system and software and things to entertain you and keep you kind of well-oriented. I think the ID.4 was a slightly nicer cabin to be in. It felt more insulated. The seats are the best of any of the kind of all-electric crossovers I've been in the last few months, which is everything pretty much except for the EV6, or, you know, everything that is just coming out or has been out recently. So I include in that the Ioniq 5, the Mach-E. So comfort, very good in the ID.4. I like that a lot. Heated seats were great, and obviously in, you know, 10, 20 degree Fahrenheit weather, that's what you're looking for. But no complaints from either. They're both very comfortable, very spacious, large cabins, and it just comes down to how you prefer your navigation and how you prefer your cockpit laid out. I think obviously the ID.4 has the driver's cluster for you. The Tesla has the Tesla software and infotainment all in the center console, so that really comes down to personal choice, I think. So there's a broad comparison of road tripping in various winter conditions with the Volkswagen ID.4 and the Tesla Model Y. Obviously very different vehicles based on price point, but still, you know, you can touch on the top trims of the ID.4's all-wheel drive version and the lower end of the Model Y, maybe crossing over a little bit. But also an interesting comparison to see what you're giving up, leaving the Tesla ecosystem and going to one of the more affordable versions of all-electric crossovers in the ID.4. It'll be interesting to test these things, you know, go ahead and look at the Mach-E, the Ioniq 5, the EV6 on these road trips and see where you're getting the benefit, the true benefit of these things like charging speed and the better network. But there you are, given the various pros and cons of these vehicles and knowing the gap in price, which one would you take? Which one is more suitable for a road trip in your opinion? You've got this near kind of road trips that we do here with the 300 miles in any given direction, and then you have longer road trips, of course, where the advantages of faster charging and more reliable sites will kind of build up over the hundreds to thousands of miles. But, you know, in this kind of scenario, this regional road trip, which would you take? You're in for the Volkswagen ID.4 and the savings that brings, or are you more towards the reliability and the established network of the Tesla Model Y? Let us know down in the comments. Hope you found this one interesting, and we'll have a lot more for you in the weeks ahead, especially with new EVs coming, fingers crossed. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next one. Cheers.